Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into today's episode of the Money Insights Podcast. I'm Christian Allen here with my co-host, Rodney the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's going on, man? It's been a little while.
I am doing great, and it has been a little while since we recorded. Man, back in the saddle.
Back in the saddle. Now, it hasn't been a little while since we put an episode out. We maintained consistency there, but I've been on vacation for like a long time. Man, Rod, I got to tell you about some of the things the manta rays. Remind me to tell you about the manta rays. Yeah. I probably already did, but I need to tell you about them again.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've been out for a little while. Excited to get back in the saddle. Today, we're going to talk about an exhilarating topic, one that just like people get really fired up and excited about. No, I'm joking a little bit, but we're going to talk about an important topic that affects a lot of people, and it's one we tend to not think about until we start to get older. We're going to talk about long-term care insurance and long-term care planning. We'll kind of use those two interchangeably. We're going to specifically talk about the pros and cons of actually using long-term care insurance, and maybe we'll talk about some, what the alternatives, what the options are in that space. So that's what we're getting into today, Rod. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Okay, I'm glad because I'm going to be handing off to you to do all the teaching. Okay, so with that being the case, Rod, what I want to start with is an overview of long-term care insurance. Now, when we're talking about long-term care, we're just talking about the stage in life when we get older and we need help for longer term, right? We need some sort of assisted living or something like that. So that's the kind of stuff that long-term care does. But talk about kind of a high-level overview of what long-term care insurance is, and maybe in generalities, how it actually works. And then we'll jump into the pros and cons of using it versus not, because that's kind of a hot topic. It really is sort of an issue that people are dealing with. Okay, take it.
It's something people are dealing with now. And my experience is most often when I hear from people, it's that they say, oh, my parent or maybe my in-law is dealing with this right now, all of these expenses. And I'm concerned when I get to that point, I want to make sure that I'm prepared and I have at least thought it through and put things in place to make sure that I don't deal with the same issues as what I'm watching happen with my parent, right?
You know what's wild, Rod? It's almost 50% of people that will need some sort of long-term care insurance.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, I shouldn't say that. Some type of long-term care plan in place that they need to be given care for.
Correct.
And so this really is something that is affecting really everybody's lives. Like we either know somebody closely or we, distantly know somebody who's in a situation like that. So
yeah,
it's a big deal.
Okay. So let's break it down then. So long-term care is basically, it's a broad category because it can include receiving care in your home. It can include going to an assisted living facility or a skilled nursing facility, just depending on the level of care that you need. But all of these can fit into that same category. And more specifically, they have what they call the 6 activities of daily living. And that's how you measure what level of care you need. So let's talk about what those are. It's being able to bathe, dress, eat, toilet, transfer, and then continence. So those are the 6. And typically what happens with long-term care insurance specifically is if you're no longer able to do any 2 of those on your own, you need assistance with any 2 of those. That's what flips the switch. And all of a sudden now you qualify for it. Now there's one other category, and that just has to do with mental capacity. So if you have some sort of cognitive impairment, then that even if you can physically take care of yourself, but mentally you need help, right? You need to have that assistance. Then that also would qualify you for kind of flip the switch.
Okay. So It's important to know that that's generally the qualification. And basically what we've seen is like pretty much all insurance companies use that same, that same, I don't know what the right word is, framework to determine qualifications as to whether someone actually gets benefits. And so, as long as you know those things, it's helpful to be able to give us a direction. Okay, so I want to get into like some of the pros and cons. Well, actually, before I do that, maybe talk about the long-term care insurance. So now we know like, what is the framework for when benefits might work and pay out. But what do like long-term care insurance policies actually look like? And again, in general.
Sure. Yeah. Generally speaking, what it does is it creates think of it like a monthly stipend, right? So in other words, if I'm in that position and I need that help, and I have, again, whether it's a nurse coming to my home or I'm in a facility and I have monthly expenses associated with that, then the long-term care insurance is kicking in, and it's defined by the policy. Whatever I set up in the beginning determines how much per month. And it's usually stated either by a monthly amount or by a daily number. That's the most common way you'll see it. But either way, like based on the policy I created, determines how much I have available to me. They call it the max benefit. And then that turns into, defined by the policy, a total benefit that would be available to me. And then again, that's either stated in terms of a maximum amount, like a total benefit that I could receive. I'm not going to get any more than the monthly number that's stated. But then lifetime, they'll define what the max is that I can get. And so 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years is often kind of a framework that exists within.
And of course, it's important to know like the duration and the amount of benefits is largely what define the amount that we're going to be spending, the premiums, right?
Yeah.
So longer frame, like a longer time frame. If I've got a 10-year timeline on those benefits, like that's going to be significantly more expensive than if I'm trying to cover it for like, the average time that people generally need long-term care, which is somewhere in that 2 to 3 year range.
Yeah.
Right?
And that part of it becomes the challenge too, because we often think in terms of averages and then you have the outliers, right? And especially I think this is true in the cognitive impairment world that end up needing care for longer than a 2 to 3 year time frame. So you're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to plan around that average. Well, 2 to 3 years sounds great. I can pay premiums based on that. Just realizing that there's a chance the care could last longer, obviously.
Yeah, that's super important. So as we get into like the planning process, like for most people, long-term care insurance is one element of planning for long-term care as a whole, right? Mm-hmm. So really what we're doing is we're, mapping out our financial lives, and we're saying, if in a situation I need long-term care, what are the possibilities that I can use to actually pay for it? So there's really options, right? I can completely self-insure, I can partially self-insure, or I can completely insure it, right? I have all of those options that I can look at and kind of say, okay, based on the information that I have, what makes sense. And that's really what we want to get into today, is try to talk through and help people understand what some of those pros and cons of actual long-term care insurance are in the overall framework of planning for long-term care. Again, realizing that may be a small portion of my overall plan to cover long-term care, or it may not. But like at the end of the day, I think it's important for people to have a framework so they can make a good decision and determine whether it's good or whether it's right for them individually or not. And that's really the goal. Yep. So that being the case, Rod, we are going to start with the obvious benefits of owning long-term care insurance. And the first one is simply the financial protection. We know if we have it covered, that if that event takes place, we then have this policy that as long as we're up to date, paying our policy premiums, that situation comes, we have XYZ benefit ahead of us. So there's something to be said for that, right? Like we just know it's there. And of course that naturally kind of creates peace of mind, right? creates an element of understanding and feeling like, okay, this, I don't have to save tons and tons of money, or it might look like, hey, I can spend my money more freely knowing that I have this backstop. I'm not having to sit there and hoard a bunch of money for that. So there's some reasons that someone could look at that and say like, hey, that feels really good to just make sure it's totally covered. That's the first one that comes to mind. What are some of the other pros that come to your mind?
Yeah, the second one is access to better care. And really the obvious kind of counterpart to this one is that people will often talk about, oh, but there's Medicaid, right? If I spend all of my money down, but if I get into that situation, I have money, I've saved for it, I spend all that money, the backstop is Medicaid, which is true, right? However, the biggest glaring problem with that is just what kind of care do you have access to? Some bureaucrat out there is deciding how much you have to spend each month, and that's it. That's your budget. You have no additional options because you've already spent all your money down. That's the only reason you qualify for Medicare and Medicaid in the first place. So that's a huge benefit to having the insurance in place. You get to,
you're not having to rely on, you're at least to the extent that you have those benefits in place, you're not going to have to rely on just Medicaid and the subpar, kind of benefits that come with just being on Medicaid.
Yep.
That's a big deal. And then of course it can be one of those things like in the same framework that I get some peace of mind, I also get to know that I'm not going to leave financial burden. Again, I have to put a caveat on this because we talked about at the beginning, long-term care insurance has parameters. So here's what I want to here's a point that just keeps coming to my mind. I want to emphasize. It's not a situation where it's just like, okay, I purchased this insurance. Let's say that I purchased a 3-year benefit. Mm-hmm. I'm just like, I don't have to worry about it at all in any way, shape, or form. I can just go spend money freely thinking that's not even on the radar. That is not the case, right? Because to your point earlier, we're not talking, each person is so individual. I could need it for 10 years. And if I've got a policy for 3, then that peace of mind that I was feeling was really misplaced.
Yes.
Right. So the same thing applies here when you talk about like relieving family burden to the extent that I have the benefits in place. Then now, and again, that's why I keep emphasizing this too. And it really is about planning for long-term care holistically. Like it might even be a situation where I've got, and this is where I could feel a lot better, right? This is where I get the peace of mind and where I get the, knowledge that I'm not out leaving my family burdened when I look at my overall financial resources and I plan out, or I map out a roadmap that shows me what I'm going to do depending on which given situation. And regardless of what those are, it's covered. It's comfortable, right? That's when you're really getting that. So I don't want to put the idea out here that, hey, if you own long-term care insurance, you have peace of mind, or you've given your family financial, like that burden is just relieved. That's not the case. You've got to have planned for long-term care, and long-term care insurance may be a big part or a small part of what that looks like overall.
And can I take that a step further? There's at least one state in the US that has a long-term care plan in place. So Washington State implemented this. It's been probably 4 or 5 years ago. It's a mandatory program that everybody has to participate in. So when payroll is processed, the same as they take for Medicare and Social Security, they also take for the state level long-term care program. And the problem with that is if you live in Washington, and I know California's been considering, I don't know if they ended up passing a similar type of thing. I'm sure other states will now start doing this. But be aware, like look at it and see, well, what is the actual benefit that it provides? Because if I remember correctly, the Washington State benefit is only like $7,500 or something. You could eat through that in a month, right?
Yeah, that's such a small amount.
And so don't get overly complacent, even if you have a state level or maybe even like a company benefit or something, right? Look into it and understand what kind of benefit it actually provides. And then okay, maybe I need to do some additional planning beyond that.
Yeah. And if it's just like awesome and you're like, hey, this thing's going to cover me for 15 grand a month if I need it to, then you're in good shape and you do your thing, right? That's great. But one way or another, it's the focus on a plan rather than just that one element that makes things really hum and give you the peace of mind that you want. Okay, Rod, I want you to talk about just the tax elements that come with, like, I have this under the lists of pros, these quote unquote tax benefits, but really what I want you to do is just explain to people what are the tax implications of, and again, realizing that there are caveats to this, but as a general rule, what am I going to see from a tax perspective when I pay premiums, when I take benefits, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So on the premium side, the premiums can be tax deductible in a couple of situations. In the one case, it's if the premiums exceed 7.5% of your annual gross income, EGI, which also fits in. I mean, you already be familiar with there's like healthcare related expenses. So if you have other expenses and the premium, and that all gets you above the 7.5% of your AGI, obviously a lot of people with higher income, that wouldn't be the case, right?
Okay, so but what you're saying is, Rod, that it's not just the LTC alone, it's in conjunction with any other healthcare expenses.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and that does make a big difference. I was thinking about it, and I'm like, man, you'd have to have a $600, $700, $800 if you made $100,000 just to even get to that number. And so, and then if it just seems crazy. So, but that makes a lot more sense if we're talking about, healthcare expenses more holistically, especially because as we tend to get older, we of course naturally have more healthcare expenses. And so, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify.
And then an extension of that is if you're self-employed, then there are more ways to make it deductible in a similar way that you can deduct your health insurance premiums as a self-employed person. Then there are things here as well. So again, we're not getting into all the rules, but not a surprise, right? Self-employed opportunities exist in the tax code in a lot of different cases. This is another one of those. So that's on the front end.
Okay. So now the back end. Now I'm at that stage where I'm going to be taking my benefit because 2 of the 6 functions of daily living are no longer intact. What does that look like?
So in almost all cases, the benefit coming to you is tax-free. Okay. So the couple of situations where it wouldn't be, we're going to get into some conversation around hybrid types of plans where instead of just paying a premium over many years, I take a lump sum and move that into a plan. And if that lump sum that I'm moving into the plan is IRA money, it's pre-tax money, then when I receive that benefit, then it's going to be taxable, right? So because basically that just represents the equivalent of a distribution coming out of my IRA, therefore it's taxable. So there are some situations where that happens, but for most people, the tax benefit is that when you receive those funds, you don't have to count it as income or other things like that. It comes to you tax-free.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get into some of the cons that come with using long-term care insurance specifically. And then we're going to talk about any alternatives that people might want to be looking at and considering because, well, so here's the deal. Long-term care in general, like obviously this wasn't something people planned for 50 years ago, right? So long-term care insurance is relatively new. There's still a lot of, I don't know, this is maybe a bit of a stretch. I'll call it innovation. And I don't know if there's such thing as innovation in the insurance world, but there's still like a lot of adjustments and, changes that are being made to the long-term care insurance world. And so, we'll get into that. Okay. But before we do it, I want to get into the cons and I'll kick us off. The first one that is a big con is that you have a high premium cost, right? Yep. And maybe I'm actually going to cover 2 of them at once because it's really a high cost for premiums without a knowledge that I'm going to use the benefit. So if I'm, I might pay a premium for 30 years. Let's say I pay, $700 a month for 30 years because I, bought a fairly robust long-term care plan and I never need it. Like, yeah, I've had some peace of mind benefit there, but I could be out hundreds of thousands of dollars in that time, especially when you consider lost opportunity cost. If I start paying for it at 65 and I live to 90, that's going to end up being like a significant amount of money that I could have used to do other things with. And of course I did. So I used that statistic earlier where I suggested that about 50% of people need long-term care insurance. Well, that means the other 50% don't. Right. And inside the long-term care insurance world, 50% of the people who purchase it will not ever need it. So that's kind of where you're at. Like now, maybe something about your family history and other things that might make you feel more confident one way or the other. But just as a general rule, there's about a 50-50 chance that I'll actually need to use it. So you have to be comfortable with the idea that I'm going to. And now I should say that's how most insurance works anyway. So maybe we're all comfortable with that. But most insurance doesn't cost that much. So think about this. Our auto insurance as an example, right? Like someone pays, $150 a month for a couple of cars, or that's pretty typical, right? Maybe that might even be high. I don't know. Like I'm trying to think of what my premiums are off the top of my head, but they're not that significant, right? Yeah. And and there's a much higher probability that in some way, shape, or form, I'm going to need to use my auto insurance or my health insurance. Same thing. Health insurance is like, we know it's kind of absurd. It's kind of gotten crazy, but at least we kind of know we're likely to use it, right? Yeah. Like there's little chance that I'm not going to use it at all. Right. You know what I'm saying? Yep. So that's what makes long-term care so difficult. The combination, or those are a couple of things that make it difficult. High premiums combined with the potential for unused benefits. Yeah. And the premiums are going to go up. So imagine this. This has been one of the most difficult things for the long-term care companies to cover. There have been a lot of insurance companies that have gotten into long-term care and got back out because they were not interested in continuing to try to play. Because like the scenario you gave, if someone starts it at 65 or even like 55, and it's going to be 20 to 30 years before they're likely to need it, that's a thought process on the person, the buyer of the policy, but it's also a thought process on the side of the insurance company. Is this going to be sustainable? We're pricing it. We think we're pricing it okay. But again, it turns out a lot of the companies were not pricing it in a way that made sense, and they just ended up shutting the door. So increasing premiums is a thing you have to plan for as well. Yeah, that's a great point. And I usually bring that up in conjunction with those other two because it's such a critical issue, right? Like, and I've seen people... It's been sad. I've seen people, honestly, this was earlier on in my career, but I remember sitting down with an older couple who had been paying on their policy for like 14 years or something. And it got to the point finally at like $700 or $800 a month where they could no longer afford it. It started at like 350 or something. And they thought, okay, like we can make this work. The benefit didn't increase, right? Just the premium. And eventually it just phased them right out of the ability to pay for it at the point in time when they are the most likely to actually need the benefit. Right. So that can be really sad. And anyway, now I get that most people listening to our pod are going to be high income earners, and maybe this is less of an issue. But still, we all want to be smart and thoughtful with our money and, have peace of mind. So, okay. What are some of the other cons that come to mind when we think of long-term care? Yeah, I mean, it is insurance. So there may be restrictions and complexities to it that you may or may not understand, or even if you understood them in the front end, but then again, 20 years later, when it comes time to use it, you just may not remember all those things. And so surprises can pop up as you're not remembering. For example, there are going to be waiting periods before the benefit kicks in, right? Is that a 60-day, 90-day? Often it's 180 days of qualifying for that level of care, but not qualifying for the insurance benefit yet, right? Similar to disability insurance in that way. So remembering all of those things and planning around those things, it's an inherent issue with this kind of policy. And then, of course, there's the fact that you have to qualify for it.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
you brought up disability insurance. And one thing I learned quickly when we were working a little bit with Guardian years ago is that disability insurance is challenging to qualify for.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? Long-term care insurance can be challenging to qualify for. If you have pre-existing conditions, then it's highly likely that they'll just they'll either jack up the premiums or they'll just outright decline that specific pre-existing condition.
Yeah, and isn't
right?
that wild? So you go get the insurance and you're saying it's this in case this happens, and then they say, well, yeah, we're going to cover everything except
the thing that's most likely to happen
that you already are dealing with. And you're like, okay, thanks a lot for that.
Brilliant. So those are hard, and those really are. All of these things make long-term care insurance really hard. I'll be honest with you. I tend to lean toward, for most people, I would look for an alternative first inside of my overall plan. That doesn't mean that if you're someone that's purchased long-term care insurance, you haven't made a good decision. Each person's individual. They've got to look at the pros and cons and decide for themselves. But because of those cons, it just feels like it's, you're fighting an uphill battle, and there might be better ways to do it. So what I want to do is actually kind of change course a little bit and talk about what maybe the alternatives to that are, and especially the alternatives that, the kind of our typical clients, our typical listeners would most likely be wanting to do instead, find value in.
Sure. Well, let's start with the most obvious and probably the most beneficial is life insurance. So life insurance with riders attached to it that are specific to take care of these types of needs. And I bring that one up because in the strategies that we implement, whether it be the Investment Optimizer, Capital Avalanche, these policies that we're creating have riders attached to them that help with this type of thing. And I want to be really clear because there are different types of riders. In most cases, what you're getting is what's called a chronic illness rider. And the only reason that that's kind of separated into a separate category is because it provides for these same types of expenses, right? Same qualifying, the two activities of daily living, the cognitive impairment type of thing qualifies you for it. But it doesn't pay out in like a monthly stipend necessarily. It can, but it can also come out in like a lump sum or other things like that. And essentially what's happening is the insurance company is saying, hey, we've qualified you for this much insurance, this much life insurance. So when you pass away, we're planning to pay this out. But if earlier than that, so let's say my life expectancy is age 88 or something, but I'm age 75 when I have this long-term care need, they're saying they're going to what's called accelerate a portion of my death benefit to use for those expenses while I'm still living. And so maybe I need, let's just say I need $100,000 total of money to pay for those expenses. They might take $250,000 off of my death benefit to pay out that $100,000 worth of cash to pay for those long-term care types of expenses. And the ratio, that discount, depends on how old I am when I need it, right? That same 100,000 would transfer into, again, I'm just throwing out round numbers, but let's say it was like $350,000 worth of death benefit coming off my policy if I'm 65 when it happens, or $100,000 worth of benefit translates into $175,000 of death benefit coming off my policy if I'm 80 when I need the benefit, right? So, but the point is that because they've already priced that into premium for paying out a death benefit at some point, that's what makes it so that they can provide the long-term care in a much more easy way to kind of bite off for people, right?
Yeah, it's a lot more cost effective for most people for a lot of reasons, right? You think about one of the benefits here is that if you're buying life insurance, if you're buying a permanent life insurance policy, you're doing it with the intention that I'm going to get a death benefit. So one of the huge and most obvious values is that I'm going to get the benefit in some way, shape. I say me or my family are going to get the benefit in some way, shape, or form. Either I'm going to get money when I need it for long-term care expenses, or I'm going to have a death benefit that's going to go to my family. So it's money that is useful from a planning perspective, especially if I am someone who's, focused on trying to help the next generation be better off, right? If that's my overall goal, then it ends up being a really efficient way to do it. Because then again, on the other side, if I don't end up needing it, well, that's just more money that goes to that overall plan of, helping build my family. Maybe it's charity, whatever that is that I care about.
Yeah, for sure. So that's the chronic illness rider. And in most cases, there's no additional premium you have to pay to include that rider. The quote unquote cost comes on the back end, like I talked about, with where they discount the dollars coming off of it to what you're actually receiving. The other category is more pure long-term care. And so essentially you're just attaching a long-term care policy to your life insurance policy. There is an additional premium that you're paying for that. And it translates into the exact same things as we talked about, basically a monthly stipend for a specified period of time up to a maximum amount. So it looks very similar, but just make sure that if you're looking at insurance and it includes a rider like this, or you have insurance and it includes a rider like this, just make sure you know which category it falls into, chronic illness or traditional, like pure long-term care.
From your perspective, Rod, what would you say? And, we're not pretending to be experts in this space. However, I'm curious, why would somebody get the long-term care rider that's more like a pure long-term care policy on their life insurance versus getting the long-term care policy? Is there a primary reason why someone might go to one versus the other?
Maybe for simplicity, for like a one-stop shop kind of idea. Like, I want both of these types of insurance. I'm going through the same underwriting process with this company. I might as well just get them together. That's okay. Probably the.
But it's not like it's significantly more cost effective to get the benefit in one place versus the other.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Makes sense. That makes sense, right? That makes sense. Okay. So just a quick recap on this. I've got two types of riders. Primarily, I've got the chronic illness rider. There's no cost on the front end to the chronic illness rider. I just have to pay a cost in terms of time value of money, really, right? Because they're paying it. They usually call it like well, I guess it depends on the company, chronic illness for long-term care, or it could be an accelerated death benefit rider or whatever. But that's ultimately what they're doing, is they're saying, hey, this death benefit exists. It's going to be paid to you no matter what. You're paying these premiums. Therefore, we're willing to pay it to you now at a somewhat discounted rate. Again, depending on age and the things you talk about. Yep. Or I could just go purely get it on top of a policy that I already have. We honestly don't do a lot of that. Like, most of the time we recommend people do it in the course of the policy that they have. Because again, like, the same thing exists, the same negatives exist inside of using that rider on the life insurance policy, right? Like, if I'm paying an extra $400 or $500 a month for the rider and I don't ever need it, then it's still just money that I haven't used.
Yeah.
Versus on the other side, like, the cost, and I don't know necessarily on the back end which cost is more effective, because there is a cost, right? If I'm going to be accelerating the death benefit, they are requiring me to pay something for that. But from my perspective, at least I know I'm getting a value out of it regardless.
Yeah, I think that's the key piece, is you're not paying for it on the front end. And especially with that question mark of whether or not you'll use it at all, the cost only comes out if you use it. And then if you don't, then great, right? More death benefit for the kids.
Okay, so that's alternative one. What other alternatives exist?
Another alternative that exists out there is actually, it's more a long-term care policy, but it is on the chassis of a whole life policy. So it's not a rider, it's the actual whole life policy. You pay premiums in, you're building cash value, and you have a death benefit associated with it. But it's a hybrid in the sense that that policy also exists as a long-term care policy. It has a benefit associated with it. It's all kind of enwrapped and folded into the same thing. Now, I've looked at these, and given all of the options that I can choose, this one is probably not one that's anywhere close to the top of the list. I just don't think that
It feels like when we've looked at the performance of these types of policies, they're so lagging behind that like you'd really be doing it as like, hey, I'm just saying I'm going to put this money aside for long-term care. And so I guess if you're comfortable with that, then that could still be an option. Sure. It's just, there's probably more efficient ways to do it.
Yeah. And then the other alternative is what's called an annuity hybrid. And as people may or may not know, an annuity is a place where I can put cash. And typically we talk about it in terms of creating a guaranteed stream of income in my retirement. In this case, I'm setting this lump sum of money aside for the purpose of providing this long-term care type of benefit. And in this case, again, well, there are two primary advantages that I can see. Is number one, instead of paying premiums over a long period of time, instead I just get to a point in time where I say, oh, hey, I want to take a lump sum that I've built up, and it could have been in a traditional retirement account. It could be non-qualified. But either way, I'm taking that lump sum in a one-time decision and dropping it into this annuity. And similar to what we just talked about with the whole life, when you look at the actual growth that can be had in the annuity, you wouldn't choose it over a different type of annuity, right? If the growth of that actually underlying cash and creating this better future guaranteed income, if that was your goal, you wouldn't choose this. But specifically for long-term care, it's a good way to get it all done in a single lump sum. So
basically, they're juicing up the benefits of they're saying, okay, maybe you're buying a $200,000 death benefit, but it's a $400,000 long-term care benefit.
Right. Yep.
Which, anyway.
Yeah. So advantage number one, I mentioned lump sum. Advantage number two is it goes into the same category we talked about earlier, where some benefit is going to come out of that. If I put the money in there and I don't end up using the long-term care benefit from it, then it passes on to my heirs, or to the extent that I don't eat it all up in using that benefit, whatever's left over goes to my heirs. So that's an advantage it's in compared with just the sunk premiums.
Okay. Are there any other alternatives for obviously we can self-insure, and there's a lot of ways to do that. So, we talk about, you could do it through investing in passive income, real estate. You could use things like the capital avalanche strategy as a way to create tax-free income to make sure there's a lot of ways that you could effectively plan for it. But we wanted to really kind of laser focus in on long-term care insurance specifically because it's something that we really haven't addressed, at least in detail. And it's a question that occasionally comes up, I shouldn't say occasionally, it frequently comes up because most people really like that they can get that rider on their policy. For us, most of the time, the conversation comes up a little different, right? It's like, as we're helping someone set up the investment optimizer strategy, and maybe they've heard about a benefit, or as they're talking to us, we just, we throw that in there as an additional benefit. That's when it's something that we generally hit on. And, it's just a winning situation for everybody to have. No cost on the front end. And I don't have to take it on the back end either. Yeah. Right. So like it's not a situation where even if I qualify, I need to do it. I could find other money that's more effective to use for that instead. But at least I know that option exists. And so if the need is there, it's a backstop that I've always got there. Yeah. So anyway, go ahead.
One other thought on the capital avalanche is sometimes I'll get the comment when people are looking at these projections, and if you haven't seen one of them, just to give you context, in the capital avalanche, when we're projecting this future income that's going to come out, we show an increasing income year by year as you get older, just because of the way that the leverage is working for you. And often I'll get the comment, well, I just can't foresee myself needing that much income when I'm 85 years old and I'm just sitting at home. I'm not traveling anymore or whatever. But that's something you should keep in the back of your mind. Maybe you won't need that much income, but maybe you might be in a situation where you're needing long-term care. And if so, then the fact that we are able to produce that sort of higher increasing income could be just exactly what you need at that point in time.
Yeah, it's a good thought. And of course, one of the other benefits here, again, on the Capital Avalanche, you're kind of getting the best of both worlds because you're getting a leveraged death benefit. So your death benefits being is increased just because of the higher premium dollars that are going in between you and the bank.
Yep.
And you have the ability again to use at least to up to a certain amount to use the long-term care benefit. So anyway, there's a lot of ways that you can plan that, but a lot of people are just saying like, hey, I know I need to create income in the future. What do I need to create? What's the best way to do that? And sometimes long-term care insurance is like not even in the picture, and that's totally fine, right? Yeah. Now, not to plan for long-term care at all isn't fine, but long-term care insurance, may or may not make sense for an individual. Yeah. Okay, Rod, is there?
Yeah, one more alternative. Okay. And that I mentioned earlier, but it's Medicaid. And again, this isn't the one anybody wants to think about or plan on. And probably the primary reason I bring it up is because there are planning firms out there who will tell you, basically build a whole like trust plan and all these different things around getting your assets out of your name so that if this comes up and you need long-term care, then those assets don't get in the way of you qualifying for Medicaid. And so two thoughts on that. Number one, be very careful because it's been around long enough that the states are onto it, right? They're smart on it. And so it has to be done right. It has to be done ahead of time. It can't be a last minute, like, oh, now I need long-term care. Now I think I want to go talk to one of these people to start doing this kind of planning. It's way too late. But even if you engaged them way early before it's necessary, still just be super careful that they're abiding by whatever rules exist in your state for having assets that are not in your name. Therefore, they don't keep you from qualifying for Medicaid. Just kind of a tricky world to be working in.
And I've got some additional advice. Don't plan to go to Medicaid because it's not a good place to go. Like, that's not great care. Like, it's just we just know that the care level is subpar. So like, I don't know why you would want to plan to get subpar care, right? You're basically saying for people that can afford no other options, this is what, and while I get the idea that people want to hold on to their assets, like, man, that's not me. So I'm going to make sure that I plan for long-term care the right way and have the funds available if and when I need them. Right. But I think that is an important point. I know a lot of, like you said, planners to do, there's planning firms, whatever, like there's a lot of marketing out there that I've seen, at least in the past. I don't know if maybe it's because we're just not in that market. We don't see it as much, but years and years ago, we would see quite a bit of focused marketing on how to get money out of your estate or how to, just so that you can immediately qualify for crappy healthcare. Like it's insane to me. Anyway, okay, so let's wrap this thing up, Rod. Do you have any closing wisdom that you want to impart to our audience?
I think I've hit on everything I had planned.
Okay, well, this has been fun. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to hit us up, Rod or Christian at moneyinsightsgroup.com. You can hit us on all of the major social media channels too. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth-building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.